Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here this evening. Good evening, Mr. Deputy Mayor, Councillor Ian Gilchrist. Good evening, Police and Crime Commissioner Sue Mountstevens, Guest Vice District Commander, and Nick, Chief Constable for Avon, Somerset Police. And welcome. It's not your first time, I know. Sue, you've been here many times. We've had a number of meetings here with each other, and you've been around our authority looking at many of our projects, some of which you fund. So thank you very much for that. It's always nice to have a little bit of cash every now and then. We don't have much. So I'm Councillor David Dixon, Deputy Leader of North Somerset Council. I used to have a bigger role, but still a role around community safety and some of the work we do with a number of our partners across the city. And I have to say, here in Bath, I think we have an excellent relationship with our police force. I think you only have to look at some of the events we held last year. Some of the events such as the Olympic torch relay that comes through our city. 80,000 people came to the city of Bath to watch that coming through. It went very safely. We actually had a letter from local praising us for how smoothly that went, and praising and recognising the relationship that we have as a local authority with the police, fire service, and every other partner that gets involved on our streets to make sure events are safe. Just last month, we had another event. In fact, we had Mary Berry come and hit the switch on our Christmas lights. Thousands of people packed into Milsom Street. Not a single incident, as far as I'm aware, that took place there. Ran smoothly, and again, I think it's a testament to some of the work that we do together. The council is partners alongside the police to make sure that people in Bath and Bath and North Somerset are safe wherever they go. Indeed, I'll crack on a little bit more for you. Heckling already, and I haven't done it. So I'll put you on to the main show, because clearly you don't want to listen to me too long. But welcome, Sue. Thank you. You have your presentation to take over from, and thank you all for being here. I gather this is your best turnout yet.
Yes, it is.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. And can everyone hear me okay? If not, if you wave to me, I will.
No.
Okay, let me. Oh. Okay, is that better? Okay.
No.
Okay. Is that any better? Okay. Minor problem, I'm sure. Okay. So I will start. Can everyone hear me now? Yeah. Okay. Well, I will speak up, and for those who I'm now shouting at, I do apologise. But yes, thank you very much for all coming out on such a cold evening. I'm sure you've got a lot of questions to ask us, but what I could just briefly explain to you what was going to happen tonight is that I will speak for a few minutes, just telling what I've done in the last year, what I intend to do in my remaining 2.5 years. Then I will ask the Chief Constable to talk for a few minutes, and then I will ask Jeff Spicer, who's the area commander, just to give you some more of a local feel about what's happening in this area. Okay, so that's, and then we'll obviously. Okay, and how did I turn it down? And then I will ask. That's easier. And then we'll open up for questions then. Okay, so if that's okay with everyone. As you know, that I'm an independent police and crime commissioner. My history is I ran a bakery business for over 25 years. I was a magistrate for 15 years on the adult, youth and family bench. I was on the monitoring board at Bristol Prison, and I was also a member of the police authority. And the police authority obviously is what was replaced by the police and crime commissioner. But first of all, let me tell you what a police and crime commissioner does not do. I am definitely not operational. That day-to-day policing is the Chief Constable's job, and not anything to do with the with the PCC, as far as the command and control of all officers, PCSOs and staff, and quite rightly so. But what I do is that I appoint the Chief Constable and I hold them to account. I set out the 5-year police and crime plan based on local priorities, and I set the police part of the council tax precept, which I will talk about later on. But my first and my foremost, my role is to be the public voice, is to be connecting the public views of you to make sure that it is heard at all levels within the police service, almost being that bridge. And if I can tell you that in the previous year of the police authority, we had about 260 people who contacted, and I've already had over 4,000 to 5,000 people who've contacted me. I think that shows that there's a real hunger and a much easier way to communicate with one person rather than a committee, and I hope to explain a bit more about what I have done. But obviously this has been a very interesting week, because on one morning I can wake up and I find out that I might well be scrapped, and I might be your one and only ever PCC, depending on who gets in the next election. And the following day I find out that I'm taking over the world, I'm taking over fire, ambulance and anything else that gets thrown in. So depending on which day I decide to wake up with, then you can see that it's a challenging role. One never knows quite what you're going to wake up to in the news. But it's essentially being the voice of what you tell me, and I'm only as good as what you tell me about. Okay, so always remember that if you don't communicate with me, I can't make sure that those views are heard. But it's not only the police service that I have oversight on, it's also crime prevention, because obviously if we can prevent as much crime from happening, it's a win-win situation, but also oversight of the criminal justice system. That's through the courts, probation, prison, and when offenders come out the other side. So for the first time ever, there is this one person who has this overarching remit over the whole system, and it's really important that, because that is how we join up the dots. So rather than thinking in silos and just sort of moving people on as if they're parcels, it's actually having one person who can take account of the whole process, and I think that has added value in the last year, and I think you will be able to see some differences in the forthcoming year. Obviously, against all this, as David mentioned, we're all in a tough place as far as having to find savings. Avon and Somerset have already made savings of over 35 million, and we have another 15 million to find in the next 2 years, and then we have even a lot more to save in the forthcoming years afterwards. So we have to look very carefully, and I'm sure the Chief Constable will address some of the things that we're looking at, but we have to make sure that we do things differently. What we mustn't do is just do things everything just slightly less well, because we will let a lot more people down. We've actually got to take a step back and see what we can do differently to improve the service. But one of the key decisions that I will be making in February of next year is about the police part of the council tax precept. Now, I have been out to consultation, and I basically, on joining the consultation, I was suggesting to people that there were three choices. We could either freeze the council tax precept for a further year. It has been frozen for the last 3 years. We could increase it up to 2%, which would be an additional, on average, £3.26p a year, 6p a week. Or we could increase it up to 10%, which would be an extra £16 a year, 32p a week. So you can see there are really big differences, but if I was to go for the 10%, then we would have to have a referendum. That referendum would cost about £1 million. So, we would have to be very clear that we would get a number of people voting for it, because obviously, it's a gamble. So that is out for consultation, has been out for consultation, and we're now going through the figures now and working out what the response is. But during this first year, what have I done? I published the police and crime plan in March of this year with 6 local plans. So for the first time ever, Bath and North East Somerset had their own local policing plan. Before, there was one plan for the whole of Avon and Somerset, and it was very clear, listening to residents, that one-size policing does not fit all. And so what we did this year was make the police and crime plan much more specific to local people. And if you have not seen it, it's on the website, and there are some copies here. But the areas that I campaigned on, and I then went out to consultation immediately after I got this job, was the priorities. And the priorities are in the plan: reducing the impact of antisocial behaviour. There was never a meeting that I ever went to that antisocial behaviour was not raised. The tackling domestic and sexual violence, particularly violence towards women and children. preventing and reducing burglary and the fear of burglary in your area, and putting victims at the heart of the criminal justice system. And not only did that go out to consultation, and over 80% of the people approved of that, but also came back very clearly that they wanted to talk about road safety and the visibility of the police. And I'm sure there will be some questions tonight about road safety. I've also reported for the second time, for the second quarter now, to local residents how the constabulary are performing. So those performance issues are now on the website, and you will be able to see very easily how the constabulary are doing in these areas, and every 3 months these results will be updated. From October 2014, I'm responsible for commissioning local victim support services, and I've been very clear that we need to take far more notice of victims. Victims almost seem to be an add-on in the criminal justice system, and we need to do far better. And so I'm looking at how we can draw together and build on a network of really small, niche organisations that are out there supporting victims, because by keeping it local, I think we will be able to produce a much better service for our victims. And I've also launched an online consultation with victims to start a dialogue with them about what do victims actually want. Now, what I think they want, what they have been telling me so far, is that they want two things. They want knowledge of how their case is being progressed through the courts or not, and they want emotional and psychological support, so they want a signpost of where they can get that support for their particular offence. On this point, I'd like to personally thank Sue Dix and Councillor Lisa Brett for their support and contribution in raising awareness of both the Victims' Experience Survey and for supporting this victim's piece of work. It was much appreciated. I also had a grant from the Home Office for community safety activities, and Bath and North East Somerset received £60,000 via this grant towards projects such as the Independent Domestic Violence Advisors, support for those individuals who are victims of domestic abuse, drug and alcohol services for young people, and support services for victims of hate crime, racist, faith-based, homophobic and disability. I'm committed to spending at least one day out and about visiting communities. I'm very clear that a lot of the quiet voices will not know how to lobby me, nor know how to come to my office on the hill in Portishead. So it's my job to come out and listen, and I spend one day a week out. Earlier in October, I was out in Bath, and I have to say you have probably the best community cafe, the Rose Cafe in Twerton, that I've ever been to. It is fantastic. Not for their bacon sandwiches, but for lots of other things as well. But I want to promote community engagement, and I want to make sure that the police and the communities are making sure that they're talking to each other. So I want to make sure that residents are aware of the engagement opportunities, and I'm working on ways of promoting that with the local authority and with the police, such as with Neighbourhood Watch, with PACs, mobile surgeries. I want to ensure that you have access to the information you need to be safe and feel safe and to prevent crime. But I also want to empower communities to tackle the issues that mostly affect them, such as with support from visible and available neighbourhood policing teams. In the last year, I've launched a £200,000 action fund, which is available for small grants. There were so many times I went out and met lots of groups who said that they only needed a small amount of money to get some really fantastic, creative and innovative ideas. So I've launched a fund where grants are available of up to £5,000, and if you want to know more, then please come and talk to me or any of my team. At the moment, we've been able to give grants to Mentoring Plus, which is for young people at risk of offending, which matches them to a mentor to provide regular and reliable support. And we've also put some money to Curo, which is supporting a youth project with a focus on reducing antisocial behaviour. But there is a lot more that we have actually sponsored. Other key initiatives that I'm working on, and one I'm particularly proud of, is the Independence Residence Panel. I don't think that we have the right way at the moment of looking at police complaints. I don't like the idea of police marking their own homework. I think it should be an independent body that should be looking at that. But I have to work within the legislation as it is at the moment, although working very closely with the Home Office to try to change it. But at the moment, so what I've done is I have an independent residence panel who voluntarily come and look at complaints against the police, and that they will do a report, which is again on the website, and there will be some hard copies, and you'll be able to see about how we're trying to change some of what I refer to gobbledygook language into actually plain English, so you understand what the letters are about for a first. I've also established a business crime and a rural crime forum to reduce the impact on our local businesses. There's no such thing as a victim of crime, and I'm absolutely committed to be able to working with that. I also will be setting up a victims advice centre with partners across the criminal justice system so that we can work together in the best interests of victims. So rather than some victims that may be approached up to 35 times and other victims who never get approached at all, that we will have a bespoke service and we will be working really closely with the police and partners. And the reason I'm doing this is because, like with anything, I want to listen closely to the victims and feed that back to the police, so that's how we're going to improve. So that's one of the areas I want to work on. I hope you find this forum useful. I mean, I'm delighted there were so many people. So that's a very brief canter through what I've been up to. So I'll now ask Nick to address you for a few minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Nick Gargan, Chief Constable. Just over 9 months in post as Chief. And in the last few days, I've been getting sort of daily reminders about what a significant responsibility it is. Indeed, I was in this room about 10 days ago with the families of victims of road collisions and the people who died on the roads, and hearing from them about how they have depended on the police at times of crisis. And I've spent today, all afternoon, I've had a succession in my office of national TV news crews, Raggy Omar from ITN, Andy Davies from Channel 4 News, plus BBC One, Channel 5 and Sky News, all in anticipation of sentencing at a trial at Bristol Crown Court tomorrow, where a guy was murdered, and there are some significant question marks over whether the effectiveness of police performance might have had an impact, might have been a potential contributory factor to his death. So, you know, a very significant responsibility I carry, and one which I assure you I take very seriously indeed. And I'm happy to come along and just spend a quick 10 minutes telling you kind of what's going across my desk at the minute, what's on my plate at the minute, and it may be that there's some of what I say will prompt questions later on. There are 4 big preoccupations for me at the moment as Chief. You know, the things that pop into your head when you wake up in the early hours of the morning and stop you getting back to sleep. The first of them, which Sue's already mentioned, is finance and money. The Avon and Somerset Constabulary this year is a £275 million organisation. A couple of years ago it was a £300 million organisation, so a real cash reduction. And those reductions will continue, and as Sue implied, you know, we've got savings yet to make. The gap, as it stands at the end of our medium-term financial plan, at the end of the 17-18 financial year, is a gap of £54.7 million. Now, we think we've probably bridged about 23 of those, but we've still got a lot of work to do. It leaves me that, irrespective of what may happen to the precepts, the organisation will be, broadly speaking, about 4/5 of its 2011 size by the time we get to 2018. So that really focuses the mind for me. We're going to have to make savings. Where I can make savings in respect of buildings and services and other things, the services we buy in, it means I won't have to make quite so many savings in the numbers of people we employ. And so, for example, a good example of this is a decision we made as a Chief Officer team in May. We looked at the number of areas, the number of district commanders we had in the force, and there were 6. Some of them were running areas of perhaps 250 constables, which was a bit of an outlier compared to the national average. And so we said to people like Jeff Spicer here, look, Jeff, we'd like you to take on an area about twice your current size, so we can go from 6 area commanders down to 3. And I'm delighted that Jeff and others rose to the challenge, and as he's taken the additional responsibility of South Gloucestershire pretty much in his stride, and we've been able to save, by the time you take out the staff officers and the personal assistants and the various other bits and pieces that are in there, we've been able to save £750,000, And that's, you know, a good, dependent on which staff we're talking about, you know, that's not far off 20 people who won't need to come off the front line because we've made the savings out of the top of the tree, or make savings in things like buildings. We will be opening up, as many people will be aware, big new custody centres at Keynsham and at Patchway and at Bridgewater in the middle of next year. There'll be 48 cells at Keynsham, 48 cells at Patchway, 36 at Bridgewater. You know, these are big operating centres, but they will take our estate to around 1 1/5 its current size, and that just means extra expense. So we need to be really busily contracting elsewhere and closing down other buildings, so that we're not spending ever more money on buildings, and actually we're spending rather less money on buildings, because again, if you can spend less on buildings, you can spend more on people, and you can preserve those feet on the street, those people on the front line. And so what I aspire to do, and it will be Sue's decision, is to have ever more very small geographical access points to policing on the high streets. Where possible, we should be sharing them with local authorities and other agencies. And the best example of this in the Force area is in Weston-super-Mare, where we've been able to take 8 different public sector front doors onto the high street and collapse them into one, so you can go to the library now, borrow a book, report a crime, pay your rent, and do all sorts of other things besides. And it's very, very affordable. So have more and more of those access points on the high street, rather fewer of those middle-sized buildings of the sort we have here just up the road opposite the council offices, and then consolidated to these big new buildings that are cheap to run and very efficient. So that's finance, and it's probably the biggest challenge that we face, because the cash will continue to go down. Obviously, the decisions that Sue makes in respect of precept will make a difference, and it's not my job to say what money should come to the police, but it is my job to say what we would do with extra money and how we would approach the challenge of making additional savings. And then it's for the Police and Crime Commissioner, as your elected representative, to make decisions on the back of that. The second thing that keeps me awake at night is very much overlapping with the first, and it's the organisational development. It's modernising the organisation, it's making it more efficient, it's making it more responsive, it's rolling out, for example, we need a lot of new IT systems next year. Several of our technology systems are reaching the end of their lives. And so the combination of moving into new buildings, closing down some old buildings, setting up some new IT, changing the way we operate is going to be quite complicated. And we've got, I think, probably one of our most able senior leaders, Chief Superintendent Sarah Crew, who used to be in charge at South Gloucestershire. She's been leading our change programme and equipping the organisation to make changes next year that will enable us to continue to deliver a comparable level of service, if not a better level of service, with rather fewer people and rather less cash. And also the organisational development that enables us to dock with new national organisations like the National Crime Agency. You may have seen that launched recently very successfully, as it happens. The College of Policing that is helping to professionalise the service. Our organisational development needs to enable us to do all of those things. The third area of the four is the one that just won't go away. It's the thing that pays the rent. And that's the organisational performance. You know, my expectation is, and I would hope your expectation would be, that we need to continue to see crime coming down, if at all possible. You know, whatever else happens, you know, we need to be successful. The good news is that the force has been very successful. My predecessor, Colin Port, has a very proud legacy in that in his time here, he arrived at a force that was recording 175,000 offences each year, and he left a force at the end of his last year here which recorded fewer than 100,000 offences for the first time. When he arrived, we were detecting 1 in 6 of them, and now he's left, we're detecting 1 in 3 of them. And so very, very successful era, and it's my job to keep that going, and you'll be pleased to hear that certainly the last figures we have, that downward momentum continues. Crime down 13% in the 12 months to June, but we need to keep that up. We need to perform against the Police and Crime Commissioner's priorities in particular, because they're what she was elected on, but also we need to keep your confidence, the confidence of our communities going upward, and you'll be pleased to know again that again is very much what's happening, and we're continuing in that direction. And we also need to perform against emergent new types of crime. There are things that just didn't go on the books a few years ago, not because people are corrupt, but because awareness of them was very limited. Offences of child sexual exploitation. You know, as you go around this force now, you will hear lots and lots of cases where we're becoming aware of typically teenage girls, early teens, who've been subjected to some pretty horrendous offences, some of it quite organised, and it's our job not to ignore that, it's our job to deal with that. Offences of female genital mutilation, which takes place in specific communities, but we've got to go looking for it and deal with it. Offences of modern slavery, where you'd be stunned at what's actually happening out there, and we've got some really interesting investigations going on at the minute, and they're difficult to investigate, they're labour intensive, but they're extremely important. So there's the emergent criminality, not to mention, of course, things like online fraud and cybercrime and cyberbullying, etc. So there's a lot of emergent crime alongside those traditional forms of criminality, which I'm pleased to say are heading in a downward direction. And then the fourth thing that I'm personally very wedded to and very committed to is to change the culture of policing. And that's not to say that this force is particularly bad. Indeed, this force is very much one of the better ones. But nevertheless, there's something about policing that has just gained a tradition over a period of time about not being as open as it might be, not being as transparent, that we're not as transparent in our decision making as we could and should be, that we're not as open to criticism. You know, my mantra to our press office is if somebody comes in with criticism to policing, our starting point should be, maybe this person's got a point, rather than how do we prove this person wrong. And that takes a bit of getting used to, but we're making progress. When we're asked to explain, you know, I don't believe in a police force that says no comment. I think we should always explain what we're doing. You know, I mentioned earlier, we spend £275 million of your money each year, maybe a little less next year, depends what the Police and Crime Commissioner does with precept, but we spend a lot of your money each year, and we should be accountable for that expenditure and for our decision making. And so there's something about the culture of policing and the way we communicate. Sue used the word gobbledygook. I have got a positively Stalinist approach to people who make excessive use of acronyms that you don't understand, or police speak that you don't understand. There's nothing infuriates me more than hearing somebody talking about the male person at the premise, and I say, pardon, the man at the house, I know what you mean now. And I am bearing down on that with energy and gusto to try and just have our people speak to you as citizens in kind of normal language that you understand. And I'm beginning to enjoy some success, I hope. So they're the four things, to the money, the organisational development, the performance and the culture, and to do those things that shows the outside world that we're changing and modernising, and particularly in the long shadow that's cast by national events like Plebgate and other historic, many of them historic incidents, Savile, Hillsborough, etc., to show the outside world that we're changing, whilst showing the inside world, people inside the organisation, that we do love them. You know, we know that they're really good public servants and they work really hard. Most of them, almost all the time, almost all of them, work extremely hard, doing a very, very difficult job, not always getting the thanks they deserve, and often exhibiting the most amazing acts of bravery. You know, it's less than 3 weeks since I turned up at Frenchay Hospital to see PC Chris Hardaway and his family, and my expectation when I left the office to go and see Chris was that he'd still be in a coma and his mum and dad would be talking to me about the kind of knife edge on which he was existing, because we honestly thought he was going to die. As it happens, by the time I'd arrived at the hospital, this very, very fit young man who'd fallen through a roof in Bristol and landed on his head, and we thought he was going to die, had actually regained consciousness and was up chatting to me as he sat up in his intensive care unit bed by the time I got there. But for me, what a sobering reminder of what a hard job our officers do and what an excellent job so many of them make of it so much of the time. So yes, we need to change, but we need to change in a way that brings the organisation with us and makes people appreciate that we appreciate what they do. And so that's very much my mission. I'll stop there if I may, and I'm sure there'll be lots of issues arising from that and what Sue said, and we can come back to that in questions once Jeff's talked about the local performance context here in Bath and North East Somerset.
Thank you, Nick. I'm going to some slides just to help me through this bit of presentation, and I'll try to just touch a couple of the areas which have been alluded to by Sue Mountstevens and the Chief. Currently across Bath and North East Somerset, we have 3 main policing stations at Keynsham, Bath and Radstock, and you heard Nick talking about some of the plans around some of that estate. We occupy at least 8 other satellite sites across the area, ranging from the University of Bath right the way through to Chew Magna Fire Station. And as you heard, we have a new custody facility online to be opened in the early part of next year in Keynsham. Across Baines, Bath and North East Somerset, we have 204 police officers, 40 PCSOs, 59 special constables and 32 support staff that support local policing in this area. I'm joined tonight by Simon Ellis, the Chief Inspector who's responsible for this local policing area, and Steve Milden, who's the Neighbourhood Inspector responsible for the city centre here. And no doubt some of the questions you'll ask during the day, during the evening, Steve and Simon will help probably provide more clear answers to you. You heard Nick talk about policing performance, and I just wanted to pause just to see what that looks like locally. You've heard stories across the media about crime reducing by about 30 or 40% over the last 10 years. But actually here in Bath and North East Somerset, we outstrip that by some margin. In the last 5 years, we've reduced crime by over 25% again. And that means in 2008, we were recording 12,000 crimes. Last year, we recorded just 9,000 crimes. Again, that's 3,000 fewer victims of crime in those last 5 years. Dwelling burglaries reduced in this area by 50%, violent crime by 20%, and vehicle crime by almost 50%. That's way above national averages for this type of crime. But when I triangulate performance to see what that looks like locally, I look at, well, do we bring offenders to justice? And the answer to that simply is yes, we do. We're detecting over 40% of all crime reported to us. 9 years ago, before I started in this seat, that was about 15% of crime. So we're bringing 40% of all offenders to justice. But more importantly, most importantly, is what do people, victims of crime, say to us? And when we look at customer satisfaction, so those are people who've been victims of crime, what they tell us. At the moment, over 90% of those victims tell us they received a very good or a good service from the police. And as importantly, those people who report antisocial behaviour to us now, over 80%, 87% of all those people who reported antisocial behaviour to us tell us they received a very good service or a good service from the police. And that again outstrips a lot of local and national performance in these areas. I wanted just to touch on a couple of areas, because I've only got time to speak to you about a couple of the areas which sit in the policing crime plan that Sue speaks of. And the first is domestic violence and domestic abuse. Hopefully you can read a couple of the slides up there. And if you can, the first one will tell you that 1 in 4 women will be subject to domestic violence in their lifetime. A slide towards the bottom of that will tell you that 2 women will be murdered as a result of contact by a previous partner or an ex-partner. The figures and the statistics around this are very, very sobering and tells us why it's a priority for us. But what does that look like locally to us? In the last 12 months, we've had 667 reports of domestic abuse crimes reported to us, and 508 of those were against women. Unfortunately, that's a 5% reduction on the crime which has been reported to us previously, and we tried desperately to encourage victims of domestic violence to come forward and speak to us and to have the courage to do that. And I'll talk to you about a couple of the initiatives which we're doing to actually move forward with that. Multi-agency and collaborative approaches we know are the most effective and impactful in this area and improve outcomes for victims. Through greater coordination and integration with local services, we can be more effective and efficient in tackling those issues, and that's why in Bath and North East Somerset we recently ran a multi-agency initiative aimed at raising awareness for professionals around domestic abuse. Domestic abuse is a safeguarding issue, and as such we invited professionals who may well work with somebody who's experienced domestic abuse to come along and find out more about how they can better identify and support those suffering from domestic abuse. They include professionals from health, from connecting families, or troubled families as the national title is, from housing, from education, from the voluntary sector, colleges, early years training, drugs and alcohol treatment programmes, other emergency services, and many, many more professionals who came together. We provided some expert advice in tailored workshops to raise awareness around domestic violence. And that was just one way which we can continue to create meaningful partnerships with others to improve and offer the service we make to victims of domestic violence. But what I'm really excited about is just today that we saw for the first time, it's not a launch, but it was a workshop today to look at a launch which is coming in the new year. Some work going on between Southside, and I'll talk to you a little bit about Southside and the service they provide, and Curo, our provider of the largest amount of our social housing here in the west of England. And they launched today a training programme which uses professional actors to play characters such as a housing officer, a victim of domestic abuse, or a perpetrator. And they expose a lot of frontline operators, emergency services staff, their own staff, to these scenarios, enabling people just to understand some of the signals and some of the signs which may just be the first signs of domestic violence, helping us to identify that and helping victims have the courage to come forward and report that in order that we can crack the cycle of offending and keep victims of domestic violence safe. I could talk to you about a number of these agencies and workshops and speakers who work alongside us, and we have great partnerships with. Sue spoke about some of the work we do with just one of those teams, which is Southside, and some of the support that Sue's been able to give through funding this year. And that's particularly, Southside supports families in Bath and North East Somerset dealing with issues like physical disability, domestic abuse, sexual violence, substance abuse, and long-term mental health problems. They offer support and expert support to families moving forward positively. Southside also provides that independent domestic abuse advisors that Sue is helping to fund this year. It enables us to deal with high-risk victims of domestic violence and help keep them and their children very safe. The other area I wanted to talk to you about today was just something around antisocial behaviour, and an exemplar that we've got in this area, which is the Midsummer Norton Community Alcohol Partnership. A community alcohol partnership, their aim is to reduce and maintain low levels of alcohol-related incidents with both adults and young people in a community. A CAP supports communities in developing their own capacity to deliver a coordinated, localised response to alcohol-related incidents. The great thing about the Midsummer Norton Community Alcohol Partnership is it was raised through parts in community meetings as an issue for that community, well supported by the town council there, funded by the town council, and it was the local people, local residents, working together with the police, it brought about a community alcohol partnership. Virtually every town in the city, you will know, faces alcohol-related issues, and Midsummer Norton took the first steps to becoming, to embracing a community alcohol partnership. It mainly focused around the high street, and that was around looking at the sale of alcohol to underage people, and to promote responsible drinking for people of all ages. The CAP in Midsummer Norton Town Council is made up of the Town Council itself, Bath and North East Somerset Council, NHS Baines, the police, schools, retailers, local public funds, and many other organisations as well. Fantastically, just in the background on this slide, what you see is our street pastors and our street marshals. Street marshals first took to the streets in Midsummer Norton, funded by the local council there in October last year, and they patrol the streets on a Friday and Saturday night between 10 o'clock and 3 AM. Becoming a member of Pub Watch, as you'll see there, means that anyone who's been recorded as being banned from a local establishment, their details are immediately circulated, and every ban from every establishment, it runs a Pub Watch scheme. The publicans in Midsummer Norton report to us a dramatic reduction in antisocial behaviour and an increase in trade as people are more willing to come into their establishments to enjoy a safe and vibrant nighttime economy. Launched in 2013, the Street Pastors Scheme operates on a Friday and Saturday night in partnership with our street marshals. These are volunteers from local churches and are on hand to offer care and help in their listening ear to some people who become vulnerable in our nighttime economy. We understand understand it, many young people don't go out to end their evening, as they often do, and an intervention that they need is not necessarily from the police, but probably it's just a listening ear. Someone can steady them on their way, help them get home safe, maybe contact a parent. That frees up our time and frees up time for other key emergency services working. Success and future plans around the CAP. Reductions in crime and antisocial behaviour I alluded to, but let me just put some numbers on that. There's been a 16% reduction in crime in the area and a 29% reduction in antisocial behaviour as a result directly of the work we've been doing in partnership around the Community Alcohol Partnership. And Councillor Linda Dunford, who you'll see in this picture, greyed out slightly, probably just to save her embarrassment, because I know she accepted this award on behalf of the Community Alcohol Partnership. But Linda was awarded that award for national excellence for her contribution towards the initiative. The CAP, the Community Alcohol Partnerships, there are more than 50 set up nationally. This is the first award for national excellence that they have ever delivered. And I think it's a great example of what can be achieved when the police, partners and our communities work together. As I say, looking forward, Midsummer Norton are looking to try and achieve purple flag status for Midsummer Norton. That is the exemplar, the gold standard for a vibrant, safe nighttime economy. Those of you in the room may be aware that Bath first was awarded the purple flag status, one of the first cities in this area to be awarded that status in 2010, and has continued to retain its purple flag status for its nighttime economy 2010, 11, 12 and 13, and something which we're tremendously proud of.
Thank you all for listening so patiently to the three of us talking to you. Now it's your thank you. Now it's your moment to ask us questions, and we have a number of questions which we will get back to but I'm going to give you priority because you've come, so we need to listen to the questions that you want to put. I would like to say, because there are so many people here, I will be quite tough, so could you be quite brief with the questions? You can talk to us afterwards or online or by phone calls if it's something very specific that you want to talk about, but if we could try to keep this fast moving as much as we can. So are there any questions anyone would like to ask any of us? Gentleman in white.
Thank you.
Can you just say who you are first?
Yeah, certainly. My name is Peter John. I'm an internet and mobile telecommunications expert. Over the course of the last 5 years, I've tried 4 times to report unlawful communication surveillance to your officers. In 2008, I attempted to report BT and Form for using Russian-supplied communication surveillance software to monitor internet communications in the southwest. I think many of the people in this room who are BT subscribers would have been victims of that offence. In 2009, I attempted to report the unlawful interception of my post. Somebody helpfully stamped it, was screened by government mail screening service. Again, 2010.
Sorry, can I did say I was going to what's the actual question that you want us to answer?
I've tried 4 times to get your officers to investigate unlawful national communication surveillance by criminals. I've been told, someone higher up has told us not to investigate. I've been told it's not a police priority, and even been told it's not a crime. I'd like an account for that, please. I'd like to know how I report that crime.
You may have heard me say earlier on that the starting point for criticisms and questions is maybe this person's got a point rather than how do I prove them wrong. So it would be wrong of me to say you're wrong.
It would be completely wrong.
I'm sorry.
I spent 5 years trying to get someone to investigate these offences.
Whatever. This is clearly
blocked off by your officers over and over again.
This is clearly a very, very detailed question, which is of considerable interest to you, but it's one that's going to need very careful scrutiny. I'm prepared to take it away and have it looked into from the perspective of maybe this person's got a point. And extremely technical area. I do know that the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000 doesn't create offences of unlawful surveillance, and so we need to be very careful whether we're talking
Section
about...
1 makes it a criminal offence to intercept communications without the consent of the sender and recipient, and that has to be explicit.
My point was about the offence of unlawful surveillance, which doesn't exist in the legislation. Trust me, I know. I didn't make a point about unlawful interception because I do understand that. But I think this is a very technical conversation, best taken offline. I've given you an undertaking that it will be approached from a perspective of maybe this person's got a point. If you supply me with the details, I'll have them looked into. I think you should also consider contacting the Interception Commissioner and the Regulatory Powers Tribunal too. Thank you.
I think we're all here to try and support the police, and we wish you well. But all this completely investigating one another for these minor offences, discipline or whatever, it doesn't encourage the police to actually do something. It encourages them to do nothing. And I would much rather if the police force do something and perhaps make an honest mistake than do nothing and everybody complains that they do nothing. But we all support what he's done.
Well, I appreciate your support, and I think I agree with you. I think we need to find a way of encouraging and empowering our officers to be bold and confident and get out there and get stuck in and not be intimidated. But of course, we need a professional standards department because people rely on us and people have very high expectations of us. And certainly the only reference I've made to any kind of investigation today, which was an oblique one, to the case where we'll be seeing sentencing tomorrow. Let me assure you that what's being investigated by the Independent Police Complaints Commission is in no way trifling or minor. It's very, potentially very serious breaches of professional standards, those which should be investigated to a very high level because they're very serious.
Thank you. Any further? This gentleman here.
My name's Alan Langton, and for the purposes of this evening, I'm a volunteer appropriate adult at Bath Police Station, so I'm often in there voluntarily with youngsters and vulnerable adults who have been detained by the police. I would just say to the Chief Constable that his officers are exemplary in the way they deal with people. They're far more patient than I would have with some of them. But my question is this. You alluded, Chief Constable, to the fact that you'd be rationalising the buildings, and you talked about plainly the police station in Manvers Street opposite the council offices, and I know all about the new custody suite at Keynsham. But was there sort of a hint in there somewhere that you might be closing the police station at Manvers Street and simply having some sort of desk facing the public with a back office somewhere else? Is that what I read behind what you were saying?
Well, yes. The short answer is yes. The strategy is, as we grow our estate, certainly when we have 48 cells in Keynsham, we will close down the cells in Bath. That would be the first step. We need to explore what could be done with the site in Bath, because actually it's too big for our needs. But we will need a response base in the city too. And so I think, and this is about a strategy that we want to get to in the fullness of time, rather than a plan that we have readily available. But we're having conversations, and they're involving the local authority, the Police and Crime Commissioner, and Jeff as the local commander. And I want to get to a place where we've got a place that people can walk into off the street in the city centre to report things to the police. We've got an operational base for our staff working in the city that is the best place we can put them to avoid the well-documented troubles of traffic, etc., etc. We've got a custody block at Keynsham that is running very well, that's very efficient, it's got minimum delays, so that if officers do make an arrest, they're in, the person gets booked in, dealt with quickly, and back out. And costs less than we're spending now. And I think that those objectives together will be readily achievable, but we need to approach them carefully and thoughtfully, rather than just rushing to save cash in the short term. And we need to do it in consultation with partners, members of the community, and our own staff.
Thank you. There's the person at the back there.
I'm Twitch's resident. We've just been asked to take on the role of Neighbourhood Watch Coordinator for our street, So I wanted to ask how that scheme is working effectively, and how?
Okay, let me just tell you a bit about Neighbourhood Watch. I think in the last few years, I think it has been struggling, but has come across very clearly in many of the public forums that we have been to that much more has to be done. And in fact, there has been a lot that is now being put into place. It's still being rolled out. But, you know, one of the things that was very clear from Neighbourhood Watch coordinators is that they were giving information into the police but never getting any response about what happened afterwards. Now, like with any conversation, you know, if you continue a monologue, in the end you get fed up because you think it's just going into a black hole. So it's very important that we get that communication. And in fact, we have now launched, and we are in the process of launching an automated report which will go out to neighbourhood coordinators to actually say what's been happening in the last 7 days in your area. And if you haven't received it, if you could let one of my team know, because we are having difficulties in getting old addresses, so if there are coordinators here who aren't getting that, that would be really helpful. We also have appointed an administrator who was used to be running South Gloucestershire, who is now going to be taking over Baines as well. So again, that coordinator, which I think was removed a few years ago without actually having much greater support out in the community, I think with that person coming back in, I think that would be really helpful. But I think what the constabulary have done very clearly is that they've got two main principles for Neighbourhood Watch. One, remove the obstacles to effective Neighbourhood Watch. Let's make it easier. Let's remove the things that are getting in the way, because what you are doing is absolutely valuable. And when we have limited resources and reducing budget, you know, you are going to play more and more a key part in keeping our communities safe. So removing the obstacles and then ensuring that it runs as simply as possible.
But there must be adequate response.
Yeah, we'll come on to that. I just wanted to explain about Neighbourhood Watch. So that's what we are really tackling very much at the moment. I don't know if you want to just say anything.
I'm going to ask Simon Ellis just to pick this question up, because he's the local policing area lead, because the commitment of people working with us through Neighbourhood Watch schemes is actually paramount to our delivery of policing our communities. I'm disappointed it's not been quite as strong as it should have been over the last year or so. And I'll make a personal pledge, I'm sure Simon will back this up, that we will get much better at this. We will and must get much better at it.
Can I say something?
Good evening. Yes, this is a message to all of our Neighbourhood Watch coordinators and members. There is no doubt that over the last year or so, we haven't got things quite right. The communication and engagement with our Neighbourhood Watch coordinators hasn't been what it should have been. There are a number of reasons for that, and you know, I won't go into the detail of that tonight, but just suffice to say, you know, I'd be the first to acknowledge that we haven't got that quite right. What we are doing at the moment, if you just let me finish, and then we'll come to this gentleman and then yourself. And what we are doing now, and if there's anybody from a Keynsham or Radstock Neighbourhood Watch here this evening, all of our Neighbourhood Watch coordinators have been contacted, given relevant and up-to-date information, and that process is being spread right across the Bath and North East Somerset local policing area. So I can commit to far more regular and meaningful contact from your local beat teams, and PCSOs and beat managers will be coming to your meetings to give you an up-to-date picture of what's been happening at least 3 or 4 times a year.
So, Bath Easton's a village of 1,100 people. We organise a database which is now 520 people strong. So if the Neighbourhood Watch wants something disseminated, give the facts to me and I'll get it out in 5 minutes. This has been going for 5 years.
Well, I just think that the chap sitting next to you should be writing those details down, and we've already done so. Very good. Two quick comments from me on Neighbourhood Watch, if I can. The first is to say, and the same applies to Alan and his question on custody visiting. You know, I've talked to you about the pressure that's on resources in the constabulary. Frankly, we are more dependent than ever on our volunteers, and we really, really appreciate what you do. And if we're not making life easy for you, we need to know about that, because you know you are utterly indispensable to us, and we're pushing up the number of special constables, pushing up the number of police service volunteers. We're pushing for a reinvigoration of Neighbourhood Watch, as Sue's been describing, and we're ever more dependent on people like Crime Stoppers too. And we genuinely appreciate what you do. My analysis of the problem with Neighbourhood Watch in particular is that somebody bought a computer system and said this computer system will do the work of those former staff that you used to have, and we got rid of the staff before we checked that the computer system worked, which is always an odd way of, it's the wrong way of doing it. And so I think we've realised that now, and whilst we're working on the computer system, we're bringing the staff back in, and we've said to the beat officers and community support officers that Simon was talking about, no, we need you back in there and supporting it. So that's the short-term plan. The longer-term plan is something that's technological, but the commitment is that we're very much up for supporting Neighbourhood Watch, and we won't let you down.
Yeah, Mike Douglas, I'm a Neighbourhood Watch coordinator. Just to put a slightly different view, our beat manager had a meeting for Neighbourhood Watch coordinators, I think a matter of 3 or 4 weeks ago. The information coming through as messages from Ringmaster was absolutely fine. The information was out there. The coordinators should have disseminated it. I went to the meeting. The beat manager had 5 Neighbourhood Watch coordinators there. I asked him how many he should have on his books to be there, and he had a potential for 75. So I think it is very much more for the people who take on these positions to, in actual fact, not everybody can go, there's got to be some good reasons why not. 5 out of 75 is pathetic.
I think you make a good point, but I think a lot of people, you know, the thing that energises people to come along, the thing that motivates them to come and participate is the belief that it makes a difference and that they're getting the support you need. Now, some officers have been better than others, some have stepped in and filled the gap that I described to you a few moments ago, some have been less effective. We just need to ensure that the general levelling up, and once we're seen as effective, credible partners who are putting our side of the bargain up, then I'm sure that those numbers will start to rise, and it's helpful to know where there have been problems because we can focus on them, and Simon and Jeff are all ears.
That is a community problem, not a police problem.
I understand that it takes 2 to tango.
Thank you. The person, the lady at the back.
Yes, hello, I'm Rachel Heshaw, I'm a local resident and recently became chair of the City Centre Pact. I was really pleased to hear, Sue, you say that one size does not fit all, and Nick, you just said that people engage with the police when they feel that the police make a difference and everything gets energised, and I think that's certainly been my experience in the last 6 months becoming involved in this pact process. Bath is a highly residential neighbourhood city. And it's full of independent small businesses who can't necessarily afford the private security that some of the big multiples have. And what I think is increasingly the case is that people are recognising that PACT is becoming is quite an invaluable process. It's not just about people talking. What my experience has been in the last 6 months is that the police team have been at that PACT, those PACT sessions, are highly accountable and have helped the participants set the priorities and have gone away and have actually really worked hard at tackling those priorities. So my question is, that, and it comes back to what you were saying about Manvers Street possibly closing, have we got a commitment that the Bath City Centre team will remain intact? Because these people have made a very big difference to local residents and local businesses in the last 6 months that we're experiencing, you know, an increasing degree of antisocial behaviour.
The short answer is yes, and as you know, Steve's taken me for a walk around to see the work of the team very recently with Sue as well, and it was very impressive to see. The challenge, and this is the challenge of the new operating model, the challenge is doing all these things in a force that's 4/5 of its previous size. And we're working on that, and we think that the way to do it is to change the way we work so that when response officers go to incidents, they're less likely to take the details, take them back to the police station, push them through some bureaucratic process and hand it on to somebody else to deal with, who maybe gets in touch with you 3 or 4 days later, and a lot of energy is being consumed inside the force dealing with your response. The challenge is to get more and more resource to the front line, be they neighbourhood people or response people, and deal with things the first time we see you. And that will be what enables us to preserve our commitment to neighbourhood policing, to preserve these beat teams, to maintain as far as we can the number of PCSOs, and to actually get better, not worse. And the commitment to try, you know, we may not succeed, but that's what we want to do, and we'll try as hard as we possibly can to do it.
Well, in the last 6 months, I think they've been doing an outstanding job, actually, with the packed priorities that were set.
Thank you, we really appreciate that.
I think one of the things about packs is when they're good, they're very, very good, and when they're bad, they're horrid. Because I have been to some, and they're the most effective meetings that you could ever imagine. You know, you've got people there from local authority, from police, and the residents are there, and they can prioritise, and they can say, you know, these are the priorities, this is what I want the police to be doing over the next 3 months, and in 3 months' time the police have to come back and actually say what they have done or not done, and I think it works really well. But I've also been to other PAC meetings where there is apathy and where residents don't think anything's going to happen, and sometimes local authorities, people don't turn up, sometimes police don't turn up. So we need to look at different ways to tackling different groups of residents. There isn't one size fits all. There's making sure that maybe mobile surgeries are maybe the answer, maybe have your say, but it's just different ways of making sure that we listen very carefully. And my job is to make sure that whatever it works in your area, that we will continue to promote.
Next question. There's a gentleman green arm, I think that's me. Sorry.
Hi, my name is Liz. I'm a local resident, and I have had occasion to feel a few grievances of late with police procedures, and I took the trouble to contact you and Chief Inspector and Inspector Rodder, and can I say thank you, because not only did you listen, things happened, and it was an upsetting time for me, and I feel grateful. Because being a victim of something, and people might not realise this, is a very frightening thing. And if you think you're on your own, I found I wasn't. So, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for being brave enough to stand up. And I hope that the more work that we can do in helping victims, in making sure that they are really at the heart of everything that the criminal justice system can do, is that I think we can, it will be a really positive move.
Being here on the ground, not in council. You need people here.
There is not any discussion about removing police from the middle of Bath. What we're talking about is having a custody suite in Cambridgeshire as opposed to in Manchester.
Just to be clear on that, yes, I mean, it's precisely what I said. It's about the way you change the operating model is to take people out of these little pseudo squads that they've created, where they work 8 till 4, Monday to Friday in an office, and put them on the front line. That's precisely what we want to do. It won't be popular with everybody when a lot of our staff start hearing, no, actually we'd like you there at 7 o'clock on a Saturday evening, and you're going to have to watch strictly on iPlayer. But if that's where the demand is, that's what we'll ask them to do. But we've been successful so far in a reducing workforce, only for a few percentage points. And I know some people get bored with statistics, but a higher proportion of the workforce is on the front line. But don't forget, it's a higher proportion of a shrinking workforce. And we're doing our best, and we'll continue to make it an ever higher proportion, but the workforce is shrinking.
My name is Henry Brown. We hear what you say about closing Manville Street, which is not surprising because it's a development area around there and we know the building's probably got to go. You talked about creating local access points on the high street. Can you give us any idea what that's likely to mean in the Bath context?
I think that the sensible, the kind of hypothesis I would test in Bath, and bear in mind that the choice here is: do we have fewer people, or do we have a cheaper estate? That's the choice. If we could move the police inquiry desk over the road and put it into the council, and look at what they do at Weston and Clevedon. It's a great example. You can walk in and you can do all sorts of things. You can report a crime. The only thing that you can't do at the town hall in Clevedon, the library at Clevedon, that you used to be able to do at the police station, is sign on as a registered sex offender. Okay? Because by the library we decided that was probably on balance a fairly unwise thing to be encouraging people to do. But everything else you can do there, and the staff are trained to do it, and it's ever so efficient. And as you walk in the door, people walk up to you as though they're swishing their fingers across their iPad, and you wait less time, you get a better service, and people think it's terrific. So that's the sort of thing I'm talking about. So that's question one, which is where do you go to access policing services? Then it would be, my ideal solution would be in with the local authority, and we share the cost of that.
24 hours a day.
Well, it's not been 24 hours a day for years. There's one, and the problem is that actually people don't walk into police stations. People don't, the way people access our services, the idea of walking into a police station is frankly a bit passé. And if we staff up our police stations to receive visiting hordes at 3 o'clock in the morning, they're going to end up asleep because people don't go to police stations at 3 o'clock in the morning. And if we spend money on that, we can't spend money on having them on the streets at 7 o'clock on a Saturday evening when they're needed. So we've got to be sensible and put resource to demand. Now, if we have that access point at the police station, I think the next thing we want to do is make sure that the neighbourhood teams and the response units are accessible where we need them, when we need them. And actually the public don't walk into response unit centres, but we need it somewhere central, somewhere that's geared up to avoid the worst of the traffic, and somewhere that makes every bit of the city accessible to us. And that would be phase number 2. And then phase number 3 is if an officer makes an arrest, ideally at peak times I'd like there to be a van there where they just walk up to the van and say, I've arrested this person for this offence, and then somebody takes the detained person into the van. And it's not a police officer who goes all the way to Keynsham and waits to get them booked in. The police officer needs to be back out on patrol minutes later, ready to deal with the next incident, and somebody else can get the detained person booked into Keynsham, and then we'll deal with them as and when we can in what will be a really efficient custody centre. And this isn't a kind of fantasy world that doesn't exist anywhere, there's some kind of utopian idea. This is just what the best police forces are already doing. And I want to be as good as the best in that capacity. But if we're doing all of that more efficiently, it means we'll have to take fewer people from the front line, we'll have to reduce the number of police officers and PCSOs less than we otherwise would have to do. And I just don't believe in having big expensive buildings that we don't use, old inefficient buildings that are just watching heat go through the ceiling, or police station inquiry offices that are open at 3 in the morning for nobody's benefit at all.
My name's Amanda Ruby, and I'm going to follow on from that a little bit. One of the ways of accessing you is via the 101 telephone number. Part of my role is I'm a local councillor. I see lots of people around here are from Bath City Centre, and every time we have any meetings, the top priority is always around antisocial behaviour, whether that be in the nighttime economy or specifically around aggressive begging. So my question is around how best can we log some of these complaints so that we can build up evidence base for you to be able to deal with them, because there's nothing more frustrating than kind of knowing that there's an issue, trying to call 101, finding you put in some kind of queue, it takes forever to get answered, and by the time it does, the actual issue has moved on. And the PCSOs are about what Rachel says, that the service we've got at the city centre has been brilliant, but I guess my question is, can we throw it back to you? You tell us what we need to do to be able to help you all in order to jointly make sure that some of these problems get solved.
I mean, it's a very good question, and logging antisocial behaviour and you know, understanding patterns of demand that fall short of actual recorded crimes is a long-standing perennial headache for us. I think one of the things that we've got largely right is people do answer the phone now. You know, when I was a PC and a sergeant, and if I would have been here as a sergeant in the early 90s, the thing that everybody would say is you ring the police and it rings and rings and rings and nobody answers the phone and I give up. And we found that nearly half of our calls were abandoned calls from people who just gave up trying after they'd rung. We've got that right, and by and large the call centre that we have is pretty efficient at getting a resource if there's a resource available. But the logging, I think, is still something that's weak. Part of that is a limitation of the technology we've got, and I mentioned in my opening remarks that we're replacing technology next year, and we've got a plan to do something about the logging there. Part of it is just the local systems, and we need to push to the likes of Jeff and Simon and say, come on, we need to rethink this. But fundamentally, and it's just over the long term, the police have been better at recording crimes than they have been at incidents. And the neighbourhood teams have their own records, but of course we need to connect the caller with the neighbourhood team. The changes I've described about getting more people out there at times of peak demand will help. The fewer little squads sitting back at the police station and more people out there at the front line, that's certainly going to help, even in the context of a diminishing workforce. But yes, you're absolutely right, and we need to keep trying at that because it's a tough nut to crack.
Finn Clark, Offender Rehabilitation Service for Julian House. First of all, I'd like to take the opportunity of saying I testified to the quality of partnership working from the police in Bath, with partnership agencies around the voluntary sector and treatment providers. We find it very easy to do business with you.
Our friend's not heard.
Did you hear who I am? Okay, I'm Finn Clark from Julian House, Offender Rehabilitation Service. I'd just like to say, testified to the quality of partnership working with the Bath Police and from the voluntary sector and charities and treatment agencies, how effective they are in creating quality partnership working to reduce crime. My question is, I noticed you've talked about the operational difficulties with your reduced funding. I looked at the crime plan that Sue has in place. The probation service colleagues are now tasked with transforming rehabilitation, and you've got falling crime. What do you think, in practical terms, what do you think works around reducing crime, and what are your, could you say a little bit more about your priorities and measures and steps that you'll be taking to reduce crime and bring about rehabilitation?
I mean, first of all, the Transforming Rehabilitation is a very big programme, and I think one of the really good things that are going to be coming out of that is that there's going to be far more mentoring and supervision of offenders when they come out of prison if they've been sentenced under 12 months. Now, that is a group of people who are quite often persistent offenders who go in and out of prison and make many people's lives hell because they're only going in for a short period of time and they come out. And there has been no support for that group at all up till next year. In fact, it will start. Obviously, there are some issues because of the way that the probation is being dismantled, and I think that will be that is a particular concern. But Nick and I spent a big chunk of today working with the Ministry of Justice and the chief executives of the probation trusts in our region about how we can make sure that we tackle that as much as possible. But as far as reducing crime is concerned, I mean there are many things that we can do, and a lot of it is to actually make sure that preventing crime from happening in the first place is a win-win situation, and the more that we can do on crime prevention, So I mean, the fact that cars are now more difficult to break into, has reduced those figures dramatically. If you look at the amount of security that we're now feeling quite comfortable with in our own houses, again, that is a reduced burglary. So residents can do an awful lot, but we also have to make sure that our neighbourhood policing teams are out there and giving advice and working very closely with residents to be able to do as much as possible within the community. I mean, neighbourhood policing teams are a really powerful part of the police service. And what we need to do is making sure that with this new operating model, because we have got some serious cuts coming up, and we've already experienced 35 million cuts already, but we need to do a lot more in getting it right at the very first touch. So, when you are reporting an incident or when you're reporting a crime, that very first touch, that very first point of call that you have with a police officer, if we can get that right at the very first time, I think we can do a lot to keep crime coming down.
The only thing I would add to that is the commitment to actually making sure our staff have access to reliable tactics. That we don't just assume that new recruits and junior staff actually know what works. That the advice they're giving is necessarily good advice. Quite often people will say to me they've had conflicting advice from people in the police, and that's where I hope the new College of Policing comes in. Is they're devoting quite a chunk of people to the business of finding out what the evidence really says and finding out what professional practice is actually backed up by the evidence, so that when we set out to purport to advise people and when we design strategies for local areas to crack crime, we're relying on the best research, things that are stuff that's been studied in randomised control trials and demonstrated to work, so that we can apply it with confidence in local communities. And I think it's something that we've perhaps not been as good as we might have been over the years in policing, but the College of Policing has a real commitment to raise our game, and this force, we've certainly said that we're very strongly in favour of that evidence base for policing and feeding that right out to the front line as quickly as we can.
Thank you. I'm chairman of a local residents association. I'm also a citing rights officer at Bar Citing Club. Why is enforcement of traffic regulations so low a priority for the police locally and nationally? In particular, lack of enforcement of 20 mile an hour and 30 mile an hour limits, traffic lights compliance and hand use of mobile phones. There's a considerable cost of accidents, both emotional and financial. The last time I saw a traffic check on speeds, it was in the London Road, and there was a red and yellow striped van with a man in the back. And I think the only people he would have caught is anyone whose eyesight was rather poor and shouldn't have been driving.
On the general question of traffic enforcement, it absolutely has to take its place alongside many of the things we do. We are an organisation of rather fewer than 6,000 people, and that includes the volunteers and the specials, and we police a population of 1.6 million. And now those of you who are very quick with numbers will know that equates to, I think, one of us to every 266 of you, I think, from memory. So, we can't do everything all the time, and we need to ration and prioritise our activity. But I'm absolutely clear that where local communities flag up to us issues of concern, or whether a concern's about safety, then absolutely we need to respond. Take, for example, the question of 20 mile an hour speed limits. I saw some national policy from the Association of Chief Police Officers that said we won't enforce 20 mile an hour speed limits. And I absolutely disagree with that. I don't think it's for the police to say which laws they'll enforce. I think we should encourage people, if you're going to have a 20 mile an hour speed limit, I think it's right to say that it's not fair just to whack a 20 mile an hour sign up one week and then go back and take a load of cash off motorists the next week because they've not noticed the sign. But I do think that if you're to have a 20 mile an hour zone, and you've put it there for a good reason, because of danger or incidents, and you then do something to make it clear to people that expectations have changed here, perhaps change the look and feel of the road, then certainly the police have a big part to play in enforcement too, and our team should be responsive to that. And indeed I know they are, but it's commensurate with the demand. When it comes to the 30 mile an hour limits and the national speed limit, I've worked hard to try and persuade local authorities in the area to switch the fixed speed cameras back on, which I think is a good idea. I think that then takes its place in a road safety enforcement and education strategy that involves community speed watch. It involves enforcement of our roads policing officers. It involves enforcement by local officers, as well as education, etc., etc. And I think it's something that should have a higher priority. And I'm sure that Sue in a moment is going to say that there's almost a 4A in her 4-point plan, but I shall leave her to say that. But I think you're pushing at an open door. But I'd appeal to you to understand that this is all about scarce resources being used as intelligently as we can. And the one area I find, and I found very quickly as Chief Constable here, the one area of demand that it's most difficult to satisfy is the demand for more rigorous enforcement of the rules of the road.
Before I just ask Jeff about locally, let's be very clear that this is an issue that fills up my mailbag considerably. Whether it is cyclists on pavements, whether it's cyclists who are go through red lights, whether it's drivers who are using mobile phones. There is a whole area that needs to be addressed. But at the end of the day, it's a bit like, that it's almost getting society to change as well, so that we have this expectation that if you are going to go get on a bike, that actually it is your responsibility to have a light. It's not this is rocket science. I'm not asking them to do an awful lot, because we're trying to keep them safe. We're trying to keep them alive, and it would help us, on occasions that. And we're only talking about minority before I go off into a rant here. But it is important that that they try to help, that they are being seen. So a bit of a colour rather than just wearing all black and cycling. But I think there is increasing number of now hotspots where officers are actually targeting certain areas, and I know that there's certainly been some in Bristol recently where drivers have been stopped and cyclists have been stopped, and at the moment it's being a finger wagging, but there will come a time where it actually moves on, because we will get fines, but it has to be proportionate, and there has to be an awareness that the police are stepping up to the mark. But if I can ask Jeff about it.
Can I just comment on that? Because you seem to be concentrating rather on cyclists, the vulnerable people. Every day I walk around Bath, I see so many cars going through lights when they change the red. The other day I saw 6 cars go through lights, 2 rows of 3, and the lights have definitely changed to red. And it happens regularly at the top of Broad Street and Paragon. So I'm all for making sure cyclists pay the rules, but motorists as well. And I've just recovered from being knocked off my bike by a motorist who was aggressive. And just recovered from a broken bone.
You're absolutely right. It hurts a lot more being on a cycle.
I think the sudden loss of Jake Gilmore just a couple of weeks ago brings our attention around road safety to stark focus. And all I'd ask is for compassion and understanding on all motorists, all those who use the roads, whether pedestrians, cyclists or road users, to be more careful about all those who use the roads. And if that's around 20-mile-an-hour limits, 30-mile-an-hour limits, then we've all got a duty to do that. And some of that is in education, and that's a long journey to walk through. Enforcement, we've seen enforcement time and time over again. It still doesn't do enough to keep us safe enough on the road. But if I ask Steve Mildrum, who actually is responsible for policing the local, just probably describe some of the work we do around some of the issues that you raised, and probably Steve's best placed to articulate what that resource that we have available, thinly as it is, what we can do with it.
Thanks, sir. I just quickly wanted to just go over a couple of bits and just put some of the things that you've just heard about and put those in context locally. Some of you will have seen what's been going on in Bristol in terms of the project they've been doing around cycling and motorists and the interaction between the two. We're going to replicate that in here in Bath. Several months ago, that sort of came to a fore. I spoke to Councillor Nigel Roberts. We had a conversation about that and how that we could work and together. So we are going to do some of those things. Next week you will see officers on the street who will be stopping cyclists, they'll be stopping motorists, and we will start in that place of let's talk about this, let's try and educate. But as Sue said, at some point that we stop doing that, we might have to use the enforcement. When we talk about enforcement, we're talking about, we alluded to Community Speedwatch. The Avon Somerset Constabulary has reinvigorated Community Speedwatch. We've had some very good ones working in Bath for some time and out in some of the other areas, and we're trying to really get Community Speedwatch going off the road here. And we've had some really good successes. And just very quickly in relation to that, down in Farnborough, although it's not my particular area, I take the lead for Community Speedwatch for Baines, is that about 6 weeks ago, the Community Speedwatch were doing some stuff down there, and they were reporting numerous, too many big people speeding. They couldn't keep up with it. So we took that to the Camera Safety Partnership and said, what can you do about this? It's more than the Community Speedwatch can do. So we're escalating the issue here to someone else around enforcement. And they went down to the locality and said, well, look, actually, we've got some problems here because there's nowhere safely where we can put the van. So we spoke to residents, and residents came forward and said, I'm happy, put your van here. And they couldn't do it there because it wasn't big enough. And then we found another location and we managed to do some negotiation this morning, by coincidence. But this morning they were down there this morning, and 100 motorists have gone through and are going to be either prosecuted or have the opportunity to be educated in relation to speeding. The next stage of that now is to go back to local authority and say, look, there's a real problem here now, is that we need to work together to put some appropriate signage, to put some markings, or some other engineering to reduce the speed. Once we've done that, once we put the message out to people and say, we've started reducing the speed here, we're going to detect, we're going to do what we can to enforce, the numbers will go down. That's our objective here, is to slow people down, and then we'll put the Community Speedwatch back out there to continue the good work they were doing before.
I'm a custody visitor. Much mention has been made this evening about finance, quite rightly, of course. Now, the new custody suites are PFI funded, are they not? I spent my career in the health service. Now, experience of PFI in the health service has been disastrous. They've become a millstone around the neck of several trusts. The costs outweigh benefits after a few years. But you've gone for PFI. Could you like to comment on that, please?
The decision on the PFI was made sometime before.
What is PFI?
Private Finance Initiative. Sorry, it's a means of financing capital schemes via central government, and it was indeed in vogue for a while. And I think that a lot of people got their fingers burnt on Private Finance Initiative because they signed contracts that looked superficially very attractive. I remember I was formerly in Thames Valley Police, and we had a custody office in Abingdon, police station and custody office. Beautiful place to work. But if you so much as wanted to move your desk or fit an extra desk into the room, the service company that was running the thing for you absolutely caned you for the cost of doing it. And certainly when we wanted to do some work in custody, to upgrade custody, the cost of doing it was absolutely outrageous. But of course, as PFI went along, people learned about that, and clients in private finance initiative schemes became a lot more canny. And so, whilst the private finance initiative has gone, at least for now, that there is no new PFI that I'm aware of, this scheme in Avon and Somerset, for which I can claim neither credit nor blame, and neither can sue as Police and Crime Commissioner, it was before our time, nevertheless was one of the very last phase. And the other thing is that something may or may not be brilliant use for the taxpayer, but the cost can be split as well. And so what's happened here is we get the combined benefit of both the very latest phases of PFI when a lot of the lessons have been learned, combined with the fact that the Home Office and central government, who were desperate to get some cash into the building industry and to get that sector of the economy moving again, actually opted to take a lot of the financial hit at the centre. And so it made a compelling case for the force at the time to commit to PFI because of a significant central subsidy coupled with an attractive contract that had been the product of years of lessons being learned. So I've looked at the numbers with some care at the PFI Blue Light Partnership that's delivering it for us. And I think it makes it a very sensible case, and it's rather a canny long-term investment. You know, even down to the point where in the past you'd sign a private finance initiative contract, you'd get to 20 years hence and you didn't own anything. Well, at the end of this contract, everything comes to the constabulary. So no, it's been well drafted in many, many ways, and it has my confidence.
Thank you. My name is Nigel Roberts. I'm Arthur Somerset councillor. I was pleased to hear something you said about culture. One of the things is I've got the perception as time gone by that young people are respecting the police less and less. If you look around, I think our audience here, we don't have many young people. It seems kind of hear very much stories about kind of violence amongst young people, against young people, with police officers maybe only a few metres away ignoring it. I was interested in some ways how you're going to deal with those things, because it is, I think, a big problem.
Okay, I'll make a general point about young people, and it's that I see quite a bit of young people, and actually most of the young people I see are really great. You know, they're creative and fun and thoughtful. I don't hold it against them that they've not chosen to give up their Wednesday evening to come and join us for this session. I think it's entirely understandable that they've probably more interesting things to do, and if we want to engage with young people, then 2 hours with nothing but a cup of tea in the Guildhall at Bath is probably not the best way to secure an impressive turnout. Interesting as we are, I should add. But there are problems with particularly certain corners of our society, certain sections of our youth, and there are also problems, I think you're right, about people not, the police lacking the confidence. It's the question this gentleman asked earlier on about, do we have the confidence to get stuck in and police with pride and confidence and be bold in doing our job? And I think that there is work to be done on that culture of policing that says, don't be afraid to get stuck in. But also, to remind our officers that most young people aren't bad. It's not a crime to be young. Because the two things that always used to jump out at me when I was certainly when I was a patrolling officer, and then when I was a chief superintendent, and you'd go out with patrolling officers and you'd see groups of youths, and councillors have been moaning about them for weeks, and residents have been ringing in all the time. You'd go up to a group of a dozen teenagers, invariably be quite pleasantly surprised at how civil they were to you and how happy they were to talk to you. And they'd ask me 2 questions, and the first of them was, "Officer, what exactly am I doing wrong?" And the second one was, "Officer, where exactly would you like me to go?" And I think until we've got a reasonable answer to those 2 things, we should be slower to criticise.
If I can just talk about, young people, I think the one thing that you need to always remember that young people are more likely to be victims of crime than actually the perpetrators. And there are one of the things that I can fund, and although not totally, but the more diversionary activities that we can do to get something for our young people to do, I think is great. The fact that the police out in their own spare time are now promoting cadets, and so we have those across Avon and Somerset, where we have waiting lists of young people who actually want to join the cadets. I think just goes to show that they of how much that they want to have things to do. And I think it's beholden on us as working with local authorities and the voluntary organisations out there to be able to provide as much as we can possibly afford.
Can I just say, I've worked for a mental health support group, and basically the concern I've got is how the police are treating 136 patients. And I think that could be improved really, really well.
You're absolutely right, and one of the things I am working with at the moment is the NHS, so that we can do a lot more. And I think that section 136 is a temporary sectioning. Is that the best way of putting it? So that when someone is self-harming or causing a disturbance or whatever, and there is no one else to help them, okay, that's what we need to remember. These people have not committed a crime. when there's no one else to help them, who else is going to turn up when someone is running naked, down the London road, running in and out of cars? At the end of the day, if police can't get hold of a crisis team, if they can't get hold of any intervention because it's Tuesday at 4 a.m. and no one wants to answer the phone, the police end up having to do it. The police end up having to be the safety net. And one of the things I am at the moment, we only have one bed, so we take them to a place of safety. Now we only have one bed for over 1 million people. We should have one bed for 250,000 people. And one of the things I'm working with local authorities, with the NHS, is that they will commissioning a 4-bed treatment centre so that the police will be able to take these individuals who are mentally ill there. Now, I think that I would like to have the aspiration that these people who are mentally ill, the last place they should go to is a police cell, because this bed is very regularly full, day in, day out, and so the police end up having to take them to a police cell. Not that they wish to take them to a police cell, but because there's nowhere else to go. So by having this 4-bed unit, if we can get that off the ground, then that will be really helpful. And I would like to have an aspiration that, in less really exceptional circumstances, the people who are mentally ill will not be taken ever to a police cell. Now, there'll be lots of operational reasons where that may not be able to happen, but that's what my aspiration is, because these people, the last place that they need to go is somewhere that's going to make them necessarily worse. A police cell is very noisy, it's not private, they should be put into, that they should be taken to somewhere where there is medical provision and that they can be helped, not where they can be punished.
And I'd add to that, of course, for the poor officers who end up in a position where they have to deal with this, it's something for which they're not trained. And for the poor, the people actually running the shift at that time, the inspector running the shift, you don't bring somebody in for a place of safety under the Mental Health Act and then just leave them to it. You bring them in, and that then means at least one officer, often more, looking after constant supervision of that person as they sit in the cell with the door open, the danger to the person who's being detained, if they're unaware of what they're doing and they're potentially going to cut up and cause difficulty, the danger to our staff is considerable. Frankly, the quicker that other agencies can get their act together and raise their game and get the police service out of the business of playing at mental health nurses, the better. And the good news on that is that in what I think many would acknowledge, the relationship between government and the leadership of the police service since throughout the period of the coalition it's not exactly been a golden era of harmony, if you've noticed what's gone on in the papers. But nevertheless, the Home Secretary sits down with Chief Constables from time to time. The most recent meeting took place in Westminster about 4 weeks ago, and in that it was clear once again that Theresa May has got this. And she gets the point. She's been listening to the increasing crescendo of protest from our operational front line, and she's been to see the Health Secretary, and she's been insistent, and certainly at a local level I can report that we are seeing a much increased degree of engagement from mental health trusts, mental health authorities, and we are starting to make progress. And if you have expertise in the area, let me tell you, we need it. We need your help and advice. Because it's going to take some time until we're as far away from dealing with mental health issues as I'd like us to be, and in the end it'll probably never go away because we will always be the social service of last resort. But the good news is that ministers are listening and some change is happening, and that's their side of the bargain. My side of the bargain will be to provide better training to our staff, and that's something that we're waking up to and working with quickly.
Stephen Little, Bath resident. You said earlier that you created a different policing plan for Baines because it's inappropriate to lump it in with Avon and Somerset. Does the same not apply to Bath against the rest of Baines?
I know it's my plan. I'm going to be lumping with that question, aren't I? You make a good point. One of the things that we're going to be looking at for next year, instead of 6, we will be looking at 9, so that they are coterminous with, so that they match the local authority, because we are working more and more with local authorities, more and more partners. And the point is that people recognise where their local authority is, rather than maybe necessarily where the police district is. But whether we can get it down to even narrower, I don't know. Next year it will be 9, and then we will take stock and see where we are.
I guess what we should say is from the perspective of the constabulary is we support the creation of these plans, and it's not without its bureaucracy. And so the more plans, the more granular you are, the more precise your area, the more planning it takes. And if our people are helping with the planning, then every day spent planning and doing a risk assessment and doing a consultation event is a day not spent out on the streets dealing with motorists going through red lights, etc., etc. So that's the type of balance. Frankly, it's not for the Chief Constable to say how many plans there should be. That's the Police and Crime Commissioner's business, and we'll support however many we're asked to produce. But I think it's a question of finding an appropriate and sensible balance, and it will be the PCC and you who guide us in that endeavour.
The point I make around that is that one of the points which was made earlier on around partners and communities together, our PAC meetings, which allow us to have a very bespoke policing service right into your local area, which you heard works very, very effectively. So accepting, and a big part of Sue's plan is to maintain our contact and that local delivery of service. So partners in community meetings, partners in community processes together allow us to deliver a very, very bespoke policing service right down to local need.
I'd just like to respond to something that Mr. Gargan said. My name's Mike Knowles, and he was talking about cars going through red lights. We have been plagued for at least 5 years with the irresponsible and unidentifiable behaviour of cyclists who take everything and more that they're given. They are all over the pavements, and I've got a disc here which I think was sent to Jeff Spicer on the 12th of May last year, and it asks for an answer. It has 83 images of cyclists on the pavements, young people. They haven't the slightest idea that they'll be apprehended or even corrected, and frankly the whole thing is biased towards young people and cyclists. I'm a pedestrian most of the time, and I find it intolerable.
We'll have a look at your CD, and we'll apply our prosecution criteria to what we see on it, and we'll also apply the criteria of proportionality. And personally, if we're talking about identifying cyclists committing offences from over 12 months ago, I would expect that the statutory limitation of proceedings of 6 months would apply, and therefore we wouldn't be able to prosecute them were we to choose to do so. But we'll get to the bottom of that and have a look at it. I think the more important point, the more strategic point, is that we need to find a way in which towns and cities can operate in which there is increased harmony and reduced potential for tension between the pedestrian, the cyclist and the motorist. And I've been really struck since I've come to the southwest of how strident the language used is in that discourse. It's strident in Bath, and it's even more strident in Bristol, to the extent that the Police and Crime Commissioner, the Mayor of Bristol and I are sitting down on the 11th of December for what's been described as a road safety summit to try and achieve a middle ground that promotes safety and tolerance across those 3 transport communities. And we will continue to do the same here, but your contribution to that is very welcome. I fear that perhaps the statutory limitation on proceedings might scupper any activity in relation to what's on that disc.
I'm not expecting you to arrest or fine the people who are in the pictures. That's a year old. But really the problem has just been allowed to evolve since the days of Olivia Pinckney, who is in the public domain, saying she wants to keep young people out of the justice system, which means that she got her targets by addressing older people under Colin Port's public statement. He wants to make Avon a crap force.
Okay,
It was actually a very low performing force, but all she did was to go and target the older person, whether he committed a crime or not.
Indeed, thank you. And I've read those comments from you in an email earlier today, and you know, I'm very, very, very appreciative of your comments, and it is for, you know, it's for the local command team here to apply their resources with that sense of balance that I've just described. But thank you.
A lot of people here have very positive experience with the police. I haven't. I don't really want to talk about that other than to say I was arrested and it absolutely shocked me how police officers would lie in court in order to concoct a story that would convict me. That's not actually why I've got the question I've got. I'm arrested in the evening. I'm released at 3 o'clock in the morning. Will you give a commitment that if people are arrested, taken to Cambridgeshire, 12 miles from where they live, released in the middle of the night, they will be given a lift back to the place where they were arrested, rather than just dumped miles from where they are?
I'm not sure whether we can give that commitment yet or not, but I mean, I think that there will be an assessment of, you know, what's that person's vulnerability, what are their resources.
I will have to walk 12 miles.
I would expect.
I'm not a criminal at this stage. I'm just somebody who's been arrested.
Yeah.
I'm an innocent person at that point.
Yeah, I understand, and I think we would apply sensible criteria to that, and the sorts of things that would impact that decision. I suppose I was arrested for drink drive and served out at 3 o'clock in the morning. I can't be allowed my car because I've just been charged with drink driving. I would expect the officers to have a think, you know, could somebody come and pick him up? Has he got enough money in his wallet for a taxi? What are our resources doing right now? Is there a queue of people who need the help of the police out there? And in certain circumstances, I think the answer would come out and say, no, what we can do, actually, we've got a car here driving back to Bath, we'll give the guy a lift. In other circumstances, we'll say, no, we can't do that. You can wait here for a while, we might be able to give you a lift a little bit later. Or you might have to use your own resources to get yourself home. So I don't think those blanket commitments are affordable or sensible, but I do accept the in principle point that we shouldn't just be dragging people off in the middle of the night 12 miles away and then leaving them to their fate. I think there's a more general point about the way we treat people, and civility and courtesy and respect for the citizen, and that's very much part of what I was describing earlier on about the need to make sure that the police culture is what it should be, and that's very much part of the programme that I've been describing, that four-legged programme that is going to keep me busy for the next few years.
I'll ask a slightly different question. Does the force have a professional CID, or is it subject to interchange in the ranks?
I've just remembered where we met, and it was on the train back from Paddington, wasn't it? Yes, it's very nice to see you again. We have a distinguished, retired Metropolitan Police Service detective in our midst, and I absolutely understand the question. Do we have investigators of a standard that can give our community confidence that they can get to grips with the most serious criminality, be that homicide, serious organised crime, and or other offences? And the answer to that is yes. And I think, and we may part company on this point, I think the level of detective training that we have in the police service today, through the professionalisation of investigation programme that's been running for a decade now, has taken the level of professionalism of our senior detectives to a level that would previously have only been dreamt of. And that's why we can keep going back in, combining better training, better exploitation of forensic opportunities, and better science, and we can achieve results in cases from a decade, 2 and 3 decades ago that might not have been dreamt of then. And similarly, we have much less of the problem of miscarriages of justice and cases being overturned that we've had in previous decades. So whilst we do have interchange of people, people go into CID and come out, and I think that's a very valuable part of a police career. It's good for the uniform that they've got sergeants and inspectors and chief inspectors who've been previously in CID, and it's good for CID that people go in there who are sensitive to the needs of uniform and neighbourhoods, etc. So we do have that interchange in and out, but what we don't have is we do have interchange in and out, but we also have very high professional standards, of which we're very proud indeed.
Thank you. My name is Julie Trollope and I'm the chairman of the Local Residents Association, and this is about illegal pavement cycling, which has been a bane of Bath for 20 years since I've lived here. I walk everywhere in the city every day and I go on buses. Yes, I do see cyclists jumping red lights sometimes, but there are a lot of very elderly, vulnerable people in Bath, and a lot of us have nearly been sent flying by these people. In the summer, I can stop anybody between about 4 and 6 different people tearing around in the middle of Bath, and I'm very polite to them, and I stop them and I say, excuse me, do you know? Some of them are very polite. Some of them will say, yes, I've just ridden past a police officer who completely ignored me. That was one thing. Or, yes, I've had some timely advice, but 2 fingers up at the police, and I get that as well. So I know that just speaking to them doesn't achieve anything. It is about education, education. But I would suggest that perhaps if a few of these cyclists were fined, and of course I know the fine has now gone up to £50, this would soon get round the cycling fraternity, and I think this would definitely help. In fact, there have been some very good letters in the Bath Chronicle last week, which you may have read. I absolutely agree with the comments. So could we please have more officers on the street and a few more fines? Thank you.
I think the issue of cycling on the pavement and all the road users has been already raised now, and I'm conscious it's been raised in PAT meetings, and we have a proportionate response to that, and I'll take it away again and we'll look at it again. But as you've heard, we've got a proportionate amount of resources, and we cannot hope to prosecute every person who cycles on the pavement, but we will do our best.
Can I just make the point that cyclists are more often victims than...
Yeah, that's a very fair point. Anyway, thank you for asking us such amazing, diverse questions. I think that the fact that they were so wide-ranging, I hope, was of interest to you all. I think the one message that I'd like to emphasise is that there is a real commitment to deliver very effective and efficient frontline policing. And what I am doing and what I'm working very closely with the Chief Constable to do is that you will see, you are seeing that we are open, that we are transparent, and that the police service is accessible. But always remember, the one thing that you go out this door, always remember that it is your police service. You are paying for it, and it's your police service. Thank you very much for coming.